The galaxy had known war for 311 years. Two mighty empires, the Xylos Compact and the Tharn Dominion, had ground each other into dust across 1,000 star systems. Their conflict had begun over a minor trade dispute near the Azure Nebula, but pride and ancient hatreds had turned it into an endless spiral of retaliation. Entire worlds had been shattered. Dozens of species had been absorbed, enslaved, or driven to extinction. The space between stars had become a graveyard of ruined warships and frozen corpses. And through all those centuries, humanity had watched from the distant spiral arm known as the Orion Spur. Humans were not powerful. Their technology was primitive compared to the energy weapons and gravity drives of the elder empires. Their territory was small, barely 50 star systems. Their military was laughable, a few hundred aging cruisers armed with kinetic cannons and fission missiles. The Xylos and Tharn considered humans a curiosity, a species barely worth noticing. They had other, more urgent enemies to destroy. But humans were watching, and humans were learning. For 3 centuries, human observers had studied every battle, every treaty, every betrayal. They had analyzed the tactics of both empires. They had reverse-engineered captured technology. They had built hidden shipyards in uncharted nebulas. And most importantly, they had come to understand something that neither the Xylos nor the Tharn had ever grasped. The war had become a ritual. Both empires had grown so accustomed to fighting that they had forgotten why they fought. Their strategies had become predictable. Their leaders had become complacent. Their citizens had become numb to the endless conscription notices and rationing orders. The war continued because neither side knew how to stop. Victory had become impossible. Surrender had become unthinkable. So they fought on, year after year, century after century, bleeding out into the void. Humanity saw this, and humanity made a decision. The decision came from a woman named Admiral Alara Vance, commander of the newly created Terran Strategic Command. She was not a politician or a diplomat. She was a mathematician who had spent 40 years modeling the war as a system of equations. In her simulations, she had found something remarkable. The entire conflict, for all its complexity, rested on just 7 critical nodes. 7 locations where supply lines converged, where command structures centered, where the delicate balance of power could be tipped. She presented her findings to the United Earth Council. Her voice was calm, almost bored, as she explained that humanity could end the war in less than 50 hours. The council members laughed. They called her arrogant. They reminded her that humanity's military was a fraction of what either empire could field. They asked her how a species that had never fought a true interstellar war could possibly end one that had outlasted their entire recorded history. Admiral Vance smiled. She told them that was exactly the point. While the empires had been fighting each other, they had stopped watching the rest of the galaxy. Their spy networks focused only on their rival. Their defenses faced only each other. Their fleets were deployed along their shared border, leaving every other approach completely undefended. Humanity's weakness was its greatest weapon. No one considered humans a threat. No one was watching what humans were doing in the dark between the stars. The council granted her request. They gave her everything she asked for. Every ship, every soldier, every scientist, every resource. She had 48 hours to prove her theory. If she failed, humanity would likely be destroyed by whichever empire survived the war. If she succeeded, humanity would become something no species had ever been. The arbiters of peace. The clock started ticking at 0600 Galactic Standard Time on the day humanity entered the war. Within the first hour, 500 human stealth vessels, each no larger than a civilian shuttle, slipped through undefended gaps in both empire sensor networks. They moved like ghosts, using passive detection only, emitting no signals, leaving no trace. They carried no weapons. They carried something far more dangerous. They carried engineers. These were not soldiers. They were civilians, miners, programmers, demolition experts, and power grid technicians. Their mission was not to fight. Their mission was to touch the 7 critical nodes that Admiral Vance had identified, to plant small devices no bigger than a human fist, to do their work quickly and quietly, then vanish into the void. The first node was the Xylos Communications Hub at Kale 4, which relayed every command from their homeworld to their frontline fleets. The human engineers arrived disguised as a maintenance vessel that had been drifting derelict for decades. They cut through the hub's outer hull in 17 minutes. They planted their devices on the primary data conduits. They left without anyone noticing. The second node was the Tharn fuel depot at the Vorn system, where nearly half the Dominion's antimatter reserves were stored. The human engineers did not infiltrate the depot. They infiltrated the automated supply barges that serviced it. They replaced 3 routine maintenance routines with modified programming. The changes would not activate until a specific signal was received. The third node was the leadership councils themselves. Both empires ruled through centralized command structures. The Xylos had their grand assembly on the planet Xylos Prime. The Tharn had their war cabinet on the mobile fortress Tharn's Fury. Human intelligence had spent decades mapping the habits, schedules, and security protocols of every major leader. They knew where each leader slept, what each leader ate, and which communication frequencies each leader used. By the 10th hour, all 7 nodes had been compromised. Not a single shot had been fired. Not a single human had been killed or captured. The empires continued their endless war, unaware that their doom had already been written. Admiral Vance watched from her command ship, the Unbroken Promise, hidden in the corona of a dead star. She had 28 hours remaining before her deadline. She used those hours to prepare her message. The message was simple. It was broadcast simultaneously to every Xylos and Tharn military vessel, every civilian population center, every planetary government within both empires. It used their own languages, their own protocols, their own encryption keys. It appeared on every screen, every speaker, every personal communication device. It could not be blocked because it came from inside their own networks. A human face appeared, not Admiral Vance. A young woman with dark skin and tired eyes. She spoke in a soft, almost apologetic voice. You have been fighting for 311 years. You have forgotten why. You have lost count of the dead. You have stopped asking if there is another way. Humanity has watched your war from the beginning. We have learned your patterns, your weaknesses, your fears. We have placed small devices at 7 locations that you cannot afford to lose. Those devices are not weapons. They are keys. If you continue fighting, we will turn those keys. Your communications will collapse. Your fuel will become unusable. Your leaders will find themselves isolated and powerless. Your war will end not with a treaty, but with total paralysis. She paused. She looked directly into the camera, directly at every sentient being watching her. We do not want to do this. We want to offer you something else. We want to offer you peace. Not the peace of exhaustion or the peace of mutual destruction. A real peace. A lasting peace. But you must choose it. You have 48 hours from the moment humanity entered your war to decide. After that, we will act. This is not a threat. It is a promise. The broadcast ended. Across both empires, panic erupted. The first 12 hours after the broadcast were chaos. The Xylos and Tharn did not believe what they had seen. They accused each other of fabricating the message as a trick. They accused humanity of bluffing. They ordered their intelligence agencies to investigate, but the same intelligence agencies had been ignoring humanity for centuries. They had no files, no agents, no understanding of who these strange apes from the Orion Spur actually were. Admiral Vance had anticipated this. She knew that neither empire would surrender to words alone. They needed proof. She gave it to them at the 19th hour. The second node, the Tharn fuel depot at Vorn, suddenly stopped working. Every antimatter containment field in the facility flickered and failed simultaneously. The safety systems activated, they always did, and the entire depot went into emergency shutdown. No explosion, no destruction, just a complete, instant, and inexplicable halt to all fuel processing and distribution. Every Tharn warship within 50 light years suddenly realized they had no way to refuel. The Tharn War Cabinet demanded answers. Their engineers reported that the depot's automated systems had executed a routine maintenance protocol that had been installed 300 days earlier. The protocol was legitimate. It bore the correct authorization codes. It had simply been programmed to activate at a specific time. No one had noticed because no one had thought to check a maintenance schedule from nearly a year ago. At the 22nd hour, the Xylos communications hub at Kale suffered a similar fate. Every data conduit simultaneously reset to factory defaults, wiping decades of routing tables, encryption keys, and command priorities. The hub continued to function, but it no longer knew which signals belonged to which fleets. Orders intended for frontline admirals were being sent to supply depots. Status reports from scout ships were arriving at agricultural colonies. The entire Xylos command network devolved into incomprehensible noise. The Xylos Grand Assembly held an emergency session. Their technical experts traced the problem to a set of 3 devices that had been attached to the primary conduits. The devices had no markings, no identifiable technology, and no obvious power source. They had simply sat there for hours, waiting, before executing their program, and then dissolving into inert dust. The experts had never seen anything like them. Admiral Vance watched the reports come in. She did not celebrate. She did not smile. She knew that fear alone would not end the war. Fear would only make the empires angry. Angry enemies were dangerous enemies. They would lash out. They would attack blindly. They would do exactly what they had always done, fight. She needed them to stop fighting. She needed them to think. At the 26th hour, she sent a second broadcast. The same young woman, the same soft voice. But this time, she offered data. Terabytes of data. Every battle, every strategy, every death, every failure from the past 3 centuries, compiled and analyzed, and presented in a way that neither empire had ever seen. She showed them the cost of their war in numbers that could not be ignored. The trillions dead. The thousands of worlds reduced to rubble. The species driven to extinction. The cultural treasures lost forever. The children born into barracks, raised to fight, buried in unmarked graves among the stars. She showed them something else. She showed them what the war had cost them that they had never noticed. The Xylos, once the galaxy's greatest artists and philosophers, had not produced a single original work of literature in 200 years. Their entire creative output consisted of war propaganda and memorial hymns. The Tharn, once masters of genetic engineering and medical science, had not cured a single disease in a century. Every brilliant mind was designing better weapons, not better lives. She showed them what humanity had learned by watching. She showed them that both empires were dying, not from enemy fire, but from despair. Their citizens had stopped hoping. They had stopped dreaming. They had stopped caring about anything except survival. And survival, without meaning, was just a slow form of suicide. You are not enemies, the young woman said. You are victims of a system that has forgotten how to stop. Your ancestors started this war. Your ancestors can end it, but only if you choose to see each other not as monsters, but as mirrors. You have become the same thing. 2 ancient civilizations, reduced to machines of endless destruction. Humanity is young. Humanity is small. But humanity still remembers how to hope. We are offering you that hope. Please, take it. The broadcast ended. Something shifted. On Xylos Prime, a junior member of the Grand Assembly stood up and asked a question that no one had dared to ask in 3 centuries. What if we are wrong? What if the humans are right? What if we have been destroying ourselves for no reason? The chamber fell silent. No one answered. No one could. On the Tharn's fury, a young communications officer intercepted a personal message from a Xylos soldier to his family. The soldier was begging his children to forgive him for never being there. The officer had never considered that the enemy had families. The officer had never considered that the enemy was made of the same flesh and blood and longing. She copied the message to her personal files. She did not report it to her superiors. The 20th hour arrived. Admiral Vance had 20 hours remaining. She activated the 3rd, 4th, and 5th nodes simultaneously. These were not infrastructure targets. These were psychological targets. The 3rd node was the Xylos Military Training Academy on the moon of Thessar, where every future officer learned the official history of the war. Human engineers had replaced the Academy's historical archives with accurate records, the real reasons the war had started, the real atrocities committed by both sides, the real futility of every major battle. The cadets woke up to find that everything they had been taught was a lie. The 4th node was the Tharn Propaganda Network, a vast system of broadcast towers and relay satellites that pumped patriotic rhetoric into every corner of the Dominion. Humans had infiltrated the network's content management system and replaced the next 12 hours of scheduled programming with raw footage from the front lines. Unedited, unfiltered, the screaming, the dying, the bodies floating in vacuum, the civilians crushed under collapsing buildings. For the first time in 3 centuries, Tharn citizens saw the actual face of the war they had been cheering for. The fifth node was the most ambitious. It was not a place. It was a person. Or rather, it was everyone. Human intelligence had identified a simple but profound truth. The leaders of both empires had become isolated from their own people. They lived in bunkers and palaces, surrounded by sycophants and bodyguards. They had never experienced the war they commanded, so humanity gave them the experience. Every leader in both empires suddenly received a personalized data package. It contained the names, faces, and life stories of every soldier under their command who had died in the past year. Not statistics, not numbers. Real people, their birthdays, their hobbies, their dreams, their final moments. The leaders could not look away. The data was everywhere. On their desks, on their screens, on their personal tablets, in their dreams. By the 30th hour, the first cracks appeared. Xylo's admiral named Vextal did something unprecedented. He ordered his entire fleet to stand down. Not surrender. Just stop. He broadcast a message to his opposite number in the Tharn fleet, an admiral named Vorkath. He asked for a ceasefire. Not a treaty. Not a surrender. Just 1 hour of silence. 1 hour where no one fired a weapon. 1 hour to think. Vorkath should have refused. His orders were clear. Destroy the enemy. No mercy. No hesitation. But Vorkath had seen the data package. He had seen the faces of his own dead. He had also seen, in a separate file that someone had anonymously forwarded, the faces of the Xylos dead. They looked the same. Young. Scared. Hopeful. Broken. They all looked the same. Vorkath agreed to the ceasefire. For 1 hour, two fleets that had been trying to kill each other for decades simply sat in the dark, watching each other's sensor echoes, wondering what it would be like to stop. The ceasefire held for 2 hours. Then 3. Then 4. Word spread. Other fleets, other admirals, began to imitate the gesture. Not everywhere. Not all at once. But enough. Enough to create a pause. Enough to create a question that had not been asked in 3 centuries. What if we just didn't? The leaders of both empires were furious. They issued orders to resume hostilities. They threatened to execute any officer who disobeyed. But something had changed. The officers had seen the same data as everyone else. The officers had read the real history. The officers had watched the unedited footage. And the officers had realized that their leaders had been lying to them for generations. At the 35th hour, the 6th node activated. This was the most dangerous part of Admiral Vance's plan. The 6th node was not a physical target. It was a mathematical one. She had spent decades modeling the war as a system of equations. Now she published those equations. Everywhere. On every network. In every language. She showed the entire galaxy that the war was unwinnable. Not difficult. Not costly. Mathematically impossible. The equations proved that neither empire could ever achieve victory. The best they could hope for was mutual annihilation. The war would continue until both sides were empty, and then it would continue some more, because neither side would admit that they had already lost. The reaction was not panic. It was something worse. It was exhaustion. Xylos Prime erupted in protests. Not violent protests. Silent protests. Millions of citizens stood in the streets, holding no signs, shouting no slogans. They simply stood. They stood because they did not know what else to do. They stood because they could not fight anymore. They stood because the humans had shown them the truth, and the truth had broken something inside them. The Tharn Dominion experienced a different kind of collapse. Their citizens did not protest. They simply stopped working. Factory workers walked away from assembly lines. Farmers abandoned their fields. Soldiers put down their weapons and sat down exactly where they were. Not deserting. Not rebelling. Just stopping. The entire machine of the Tharn war effort ground to a halt because the people who powered it had lost the will to turn the gears. Admiral Vance watched the reports with a mixture of pride and horror. She had known this would happen. She had modeled it. But seeing it in real time, seeing entire civilizations collapse not under bombardment, but under the weight of truth, was something no simulation could prepare her for. She had 10 hours remaining. She activated the 7th and final node. This one was different. The first 6 nodes had been about destruction and revelation. The 7th was about creation. It was a device hidden on a neutral planet called Haven, a world that both empires had avoided because it had no strategic value. The device was a transmitter. It did not send messages. It sent something far more valuable. It sent a blueprint. The blueprint was for a machine, not a weapon, not a superweapon. A machine that could do something no technology in the galaxy had ever achieved. It could restore the damage of war. It could uncrush cities. It could unburn forests. It could unkill the dead? No, that was impossible. But it could heal the living. It could purify poisoned worlds. It could reconstruct shattered ecosystems. It could give the survivors something to build instead of something to destroy. The blueprint was incomplete. It required both Xylos and Tharn science to finish. Their technologies, their knowledge bases, their unique approaches to physics and engineering were complementary. Separately, they were powerful. Together, they could achieve miracles. The war had prevented them from ever working together. The blueprint was an invitation to try. Admiral Vance sent her final broadcast. The same young woman. The same soft voice. But this time, there were tears in her eyes. We have shown you the damage your war has caused. Now we are showing you a way to repair it. This is not charity. This is not mercy. This is an opportunity. The machine on Haven will work. We have tested the principles. But we cannot build it alone. We need your scientists, your engineers, your resources, your willingness to look at each other and see not an enemy, but a partner. The war has taken everything from you. It has taken your past, your present, and your future. We are offering you a chance to take something back. Not revenge, not victory, something better. A second chance. She paused. She looked directly into the camera. She spoke 3 words that would echo through history. Choose to stop. The broadcast ended. The clock had 48 minutes remaining. The 48th hour arrived. Admiral Vance sat in her command chair on the unbroken promise, waiting. She had done everything she could. The nodes had been activated. The truth had been told. The blueprint had been shared. Now it was up to the Xylos and the Tharn to decide. She had no more cards to play. No more tricks. No more surprises. Her staff watched the displays in silence. The sensor networks showed the same thing they had shown for hours. Fleets sitting idle. Planets in quiet chaos. Leaders isolated and powerless. The war had stopped. But stopping was not ending. Stopping was just a pause. The question was whether the pause would become permanent. At the 48th hour and 11 minutes, a signal arrived. It came from the Tharn War Cabinet. It was addressed to the Xylos Grand Assembly. It was copied to Admiral Vance. It consisted of 5 words. We accept the human proposal. No conditions. No demands. No threats. Just acceptance. At the 48th hour and 14 minutes, the Xylos Grand Assembly responded. 3 words. So do we. The war was over. Humanity had entered a long war that had lasted 311 years. Humanity had ended it in 48 hours and 14 minutes. The aftermath was not peaceful. Peace takes time. Trust takes even longer. The Xylos and Tharn had spent centuries hating each other. They could not simply stop hating because a human told them to. There were riots. There were reprisals. There were factions on both sides that refused to accept the end of the war, that called humanity an enemy worse than any they had ever faced, that swore to continue fighting even if they fought alone. But the majority had had enough. The majority had seen the data. The majority had felt the exhaustion. The majority had looked at the blueprint on Haven and seen a future that did not involve their children dying in some forgotten star system for a cause no one could remember. Admiral Vance did not become a hero. She did not want to be one. She returned to her mathematics, her simulations, her quiet life of numbers and equations. She never gave another speech. She never appeared in another broadcast. When reporters asked her how it felt to end the longest war in galactic history, she said only one sentence. I didn't end it. They ended it. I just showed them that they could. The unbroken promise returned to Earth. The ship was decommissioned and turned into a museum. Visitors could walk through its corridors, see the displays of the 7 nodes, read the transcripts of the broadcasts, and stare at the empty chair where Admiral Vance had sat while the galaxy changed forever. The machine on Haven was built. It took 3 years. Xylos and Tharn scientists worked side by side, first in silence, then in grudging cooperation, then in genuine partnership. They argued. They disagreed. They nearly came to blows. But they did not give up. The blueprint was real. The machine worked. It began the slow, impossible work of healing the wounds of the war. The first world to be restored was a small planet called Yana. It had been glassed in the first decade of the conflict. Nothing had lived there for 3 centuries. The machine did not bring back the dead. That was beyond any technology. But it restored the soil. It restored the water. It restored the atmosphere. Within 5 years, grass grew on Yana for the first time since before the war began. Within 10 years, forests returned. Within 20, animals were reintroduced. Within 50, people came back to live there. They built a monument in the center of their new capital. The monument was a simple stone pillar with one word carved into it. Enough. The Xylos and Tharn did not become friends. They became something more complicated. They became neighbors. They traded. They traveled. They intermarried, eventually, although that took generations. Their children grew up in a galaxy where the ancient war was a history lesson, not a lived reality. Those children found it almost impossible to understand how their ancestors could have fought for so long over so little. They asked their teachers the same question again and again. Why didn't someone stop it sooner? The teachers always gave the same answer. Someone did. They just weren't born yet. Humanity's role in the galaxy changed forever. No longer ignored. No longer dismissed as primitive apes from a backwater spiral arm. Humans became something no one had a word for. Not rulers. Not conquerors. Not saviors. Something else. Something new. The species that had ended the longest war by refusing to fight in it at all. The species that had won not by destroying enemies, but by giving them a reason to stop destroying each other. Other conflicts arose. Other species fought other wars. The galaxy was still a dangerous place. But no one ever forgot what humanity had done. And no one ever again underestimated what humans were capable of when they decided that enough was enough. Admiral Alara Vance died an old woman, surrounded by students who had come to learn her mathematics. Her final words were not recorded. But those who were there said she smiled, looked at the ceiling as if she could see through it to the stars beyond, and whispered something that sounded like it worked. It had worked. The longest war in galactic history had ended in 48 hours. Not because humanity was stronger or smarter or more advanced, but because humanity had remembered something that the elder empires had forgotten. That war is not a game. That victory is not the same as peace. That the only way to truly end a conflict is to convince both sides that they have more to gain from stopping than from continuing. The galaxy never forgot the lesson. And the galaxy never forgave itself for needing a child species to teach it. But forgiveness, like peace, takes time. And for the first time in 311 years, the galaxy had all the time in the world.